CENTCOM has now confirmed exchanges of fire with Iranian forces. On the record, named command during a ceasefire window, and the White House still hasn't squared that with the word negotiations. This is Iran War Daily for Wednesday, June 3rd. Today, the CENTCOM exchange of fire statement, Rubio cutting sanctions relief loose from Hormuz access, a second vessel disabled in the Arabian Gulf, and Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon against what the BBC is calling a partial Hezbollah truce.
Partial truce, partial ceasefire, partial sanctions offer. At some point, partial just means it isn't working.
We'll keep the sources straight, separate what's confirmed from what's claimed, and ask what Iran is actually being offered to stop shooting. Because Rubio answered that today, and it's less than what had been reported. From Zachary Lehman at Mediaite.
U.S. forces successfully defeated multiple Iranian ballistic missiles and drones and conducted self-defense strikes on Qeshm Island in response to attempted attacks by Iran across the Middle East, June 2nd. Iran launched several ballistic missiles toward regional neighbors, however, all failed to hit their intended targets. 2 Iranian missiles fired at Kuwait fell short or broke apart en route, and 3 missiles launched at Bahrain were immediately intercepted by U.S. and Bahrain air defense forces.
CENTCOM's June 2nd statement is now on the record. Self-defense strikes on Qeshm Island, Iranian ballistic missiles and drones defeated, 2 aimed at Kuwait, 3 intercepted over Bahrain. That's a named U.S. military command, a named target, a named date, and it landed inside a ceasefire window while President Trump is still calling the talks ongoing negotiations. Those are not the same story.
Kuwait and Bahrain. Iran fired missiles at U.S. partner soil during a ceasefire, and Rubio's answer, per Reuters, is that sanctions relief is off the table unless every condition is met. So Tehran is taking strikes on Qeshm Island and being told the economic exit ramp is closed. What exactly is Iran supposed to be negotiating toward?
And remember Arakchi's line from yesterday. A violation on one front is a violation on all fronts. CENTCOM just publicly confirmed a violation. No U.S. official has adopted that framing, but the operational facts are catching up to it, whether Washington wants the label or not. From Patricia Zengerle at Baird Maritime.
Hi, I'm Mark, and I'm the human behind the podcast you're listening to right now. I'm really looking to learn more about what our listeners like and don't like about our shows. So if you're listening and you have opinions about these podcasts, I would love the chance to chat with you personally. There's a link in the show notes with how to get in touch, or you could email me at hello@lanternpodcast.com. Thanks. Now back to the episode.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on Tuesday that President Donald Trump's negotiating team has not offered Iran sanctions relief in exchange for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, and insisted that any sanctions relief was tied to Tehran giving up its nuclear program.
Rubio testified before the Senate yesterday, first public congressional appearance since the war began, and he flatly separated sanctions relief from Hormuz access. His line was that any relief is conditions-based, tied to Iran's nuclear program, not to reopening a shipping lane. That's a named Secretary of State, on the record, in a Senate hearing, walking back the architecture Reuters' 4 sources described in the MOU reporting.
So Iran is taking missile exchanges during a nominal ceasefire. CENTCOM is disabling hulls in the Arabian Gulf. And the U.S. negotiating offer on the table is, give up your entire nuclear program and maybe then we talk relief. What is Tehran supposed to say yes to in the next 60 days?
That's the question that matters. Grossi and Bagheri still can't agree on the uranium stockpile numbers. CENTCOM has now confirmed exchanges of fire inside the ceasefire window, and Rubio has publicly capped the incentive side of the ledger. The nuclear file isn't a side thread. It's the one thing Rubio says relief hangs on, and it's still the least settled piece.
And the shipping market doesn't get to wait around for the nuclear file to sort itself out. A second CENTCOM vessel disabled in the Arabian Gulf this week. Non-compliant vessel. Disabled by what? At what cost to the hull? That's what underwriters are pricing right now. Not after some conditions-based agreement gets signed.
From U.S. Central Command.
U.S. forces disabled an unladen oil tanker that was attempting to sail toward an Iranian port on the Arabian Gulf, June 2. U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, enforced blockade measures against Botswana-flagged MT Lexi as it transited international waters toward Qeshm Island. The ship's crew ignored repeated warnings, failing to comply with directions from U.S. forces multiple times over a 24-hour period. A U.S. aircraft ultimately disabled the vessel by firing a Hellfire missile into the ship's engine room, preventing the tanker from reaching Iran.
CENTCOM's June 2 release names the vessel. Botswana-flagged MT Lexi, unladen, headed toward Qeshm Island. A Hellfire into the engine room after 24 hours of ignored warnings. That's the named method. The named target. The named date. This is the second CENTCOM vessel disable release in the current ceasefire window, and both are now on the public record.
Hellfire into an engine room. That's not a warning shot. That's a hull disable event on an unladen tanker that wasn't even carrying cargo yet. So CENTCOM is firing precision munitions at empty ships during a notional ceasefire. And Rubio is on record this same week ruling out sanctions relief just to reopen Hormuz. What is Tehran supposed to do with those two signals at the same time?
Worth flagging. The Lian Star was last week's named case. Now the Lexi makes this a series, not a one-off. General Karami's decentralized asymmetric doctrine, which we mentioned 3 episodes ago, described exactly this kind of multi-vector pressure across the Gulf. We're now 3 vessel or exchange of fire episodes deep into a pattern that fits that framework.
Shipping underwriters have 2 CENTCOM hull disable events to price now, both inside the ceasefire window, one of them involving a Hellfire fired by a U.S. aircraft at a flag state vessel in international waters. The phrase non-compliant vessel in the release is doing a lot of work. Disabled, how is answered, but what liability does that leave for the hull owner, and what premium does it add for the next tanker captain thinking about that route?
Here's John Sudworth, Samantha Granville, David Gritton at BBC News.
Israel continued its attacks in southern Lebanon on Tuesday, but did not strike Beirut following a partial ceasefire agreement with the Iran-backed armed group Hezbollah. Lebanon said that, under an agreement announced by U.S. President Donald Trump late on Monday, Israeli forces would not bomb the capital in exchange for Hezbollah not attacking Israel.
The BBC has reporters on the ground in Tyre today. 4 dead, 127 injured from Israeli strikes on buildings in southern Lebanon, per the Lebanese Health Ministry. The Israeli military separately confirmed intercepting 2 projectiles fired into northern Israel, and Hezbollah confirmed it attacked Israeli forces in the south. So the partial truce is doing exactly what partial suggests. Beirut is off the target list for now, and everything south of it is not.
Iran said this week that Israeli action in Lebanon jeopardizes the Iran-U.S. talks. That was Tehran's explicit public statement. Now we've got confirmed strikes in the south, confirmed Hezbollah fire into Israel, and a ceasefire the BBC is calling partial. That's not a cooling front. That's a front with a geographic carve-out that keeps the shooting going.
Worth flagging the Iraqi framing we've been tracking. A violation on one front is a violation on all fronts. No U.S. official has publicly accepted or rejected that linkage, and today's southern Lebanon picture is exactly the kind of scenario that statement was built for. The Beirut strikes thread has moved. The capital is spared under the Trump-announced arrangement, but southern Lebanon is taking strikes right now, and nobody in Washington has said where that lands on Iraqi's ledger.
And if Tehran decides to treat today's southern Lebanon strikes as the exit ramp from Iran-U.S. talks, with Rubio now on record ruling out sanctions relief just for reopening Hormuz, then what's the counteroffer? The incentive side of this negotiation is looking awfully thin, and Iran just got handed a pretext.
Al Jazeera with Elizabeth Melamopoulos.
As the U.S.-Israel war on Iran entered its 96th day, the conflict widened across the Gulf region, with both sides reporting new military actions. The United States military said on Wednesday it carried out self-defense strikes on Iran's Qeshm Island, while Iranian media reported explosions in the area.
Day 96, and CENTCOM has now publicly claimed self-defense strikes on Qeshm Island. That's a named command, a named island, a named legal framing, on the record. The IRGC's counterclaim, via Tasnim, is that the exchange began with a U.S. strike on an Iranian oil tanker near the Strait. 2 competing origin stories, and right now, neither one has been corroborated by the other side.
Kuwait intercepted incoming drones and missiles. Bahrain activated warning sirens. This is not a bilateral U.S.-Iran firefight anymore. It's spilling onto Gulf soil, while we're still calling the diplomatic track ongoing negotiations. And Rubio just told Reuters the U.S. won't offer sanctions relief just to reopen Hormuz. So what is Tehran supposed to be de-escalating toward?
That Rubio condition matters. Earlier reporting described partial sanctions relief as part of any Hormuz deal. Rubio just publicly split those apart. Hormuz access and sanctions relief are no longer linked in the U.S. position, per Reuters. The incentive architecture the MOU was supposedly built on has been walked back by a named official.
And Arachi said a violation on one front is a violation on all fronts. Now Kuwait is activating air defenses on its own soil. That's not a theoretical spillover anymore. That's a U.S. treaty partner intercepting Iranian munitions. At what point does the ceasefire label become legally and practically meaningless?
If you rely on Iran War Daily for clear, fast updates, try Ebola Watch, a daily DRC and Uganda Ebola outbreak briefing, with case counts, border tracing, WHO vaccine news, and traveler guidance. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts. You'll find links to everything we covered today in the show notes. If a story stood out, it's worth taking a moment to read the source material for yourself. That's Iran War Daily for this Wednesday. This is a Lantern podcast.